Good morning. I want to welcome everyone to this installment of the ABCs of Cumberland County. I am Cara Curtis, and I'm the Archives and Library Director at the Historical Society. And today we get to bring you the letter L, and I am standing here in Lincoln Cemetery in Carlisle. And I think it's also important to note there are two Lincoln cemeteries in Cumberland County. There's the one we're standing in. There's also the one outside of Mechanicsburg in Upper Allen, which is also historically significant. Today we're going to focus on the history of this very hallowed and sacred ground. And I'm going to try to keep that to close to 10 minutes. We'll see how I do. So several years ago, we started, everyone, descendants, the Historical Society, the borough, all kind of came together and wanted to talk about the history of this space. And the Historical Society was tasked with working on the history of the space. So me and a colleague worked together on an ongoing project to tell the story of this space. And I took the earlier half, kind of up until the cemetery closed, and she took the later half. So today's going to focus on that early half, but we will get into the later half at least a little bit. 10 minutes is not a lot of time, so if I leave anything out, it's not malicious. I'm just trying to keep it to 10 minutes. I can talk about this for a very long time. So, starting this, we always have questions when you start research and things we want to know the answers to. Some of those we've learned, some of those we still have questions about. With this, there are records that are missing because they never existed. They just didn't survive. And then also we have the added element of racism. So the one question starting for me working on the early history was, how old is this cemetery? We know of no other historic black cemetery in Carlisle that's earlier than this, so we were hopeful that we could figure out the date for the cemetery. We don't know the first burial here, we don't know when it was, but we do know now that it's several decades older than we thought when we started this project. So we do have evidence that this cemetery is in existence by 1804. We've also not uncovered any other historic black cemetery that's earlier than this. So if you think that the borough of Carlisle is laid out in 1751 and enslaved people were forced to come here, there would have been a need for a burial ground before 1804. So that, in the oral tradition, leads me to believe this cemetery is older than 1804, and hopefully we'll find some evidence of that at some point. Now, for several decades, there aren't a lot of records after that 1804 date. There are no death records for anybody. No one's keeping track of those kind of vital statistics. The newspapers aren't talking about the African American community. And you get kind of a shift after the Civil War. The African American community is growing quickly after the Civil War in the 1870s and 80s. And the local newspapers, and there's several, start reporting on the activities of the African American community within Carlisle and its surrounding areas. And so you start getting obituaries. And a local historian who has since passed away, Janet Bell, self-published a book on Lincoln history. And that was really the starting point for this project. And we worked with Janet when we started this project. So outside of the obituaries, the cemetery is mentioned in four ways quite frequently. They're the four main themes that I see in the records until the newspaper records until the cemetery is closed. And that is the veterans, flooding, the condition, and overcrowding. So there are probably just under 100 Civil War United States colored troops buried in Carlisle, and around 50 of them are buried in this hallowed ground. That number has increased from the 30-some that we thought were buried when we started this project. And so we had a very active Grand Army of the Republic post, the Jesse G. Thompson post. Jesse G. Thompson is buried here. And so the rise of Decoration Day and everything along those lines, the veterans were remembered here annually on Decoration Day and then Memorial Day. Then you get to the condition. So this was a public graveyard. This graveyard is older than all the historic black churches in town. It's not connected to a church, just like the white public graveyard that we know where Molly Pitcher is buried. They're public graveyards. Only no one owned this and no one was taking care of it. There was no owner to make sure it was taken care of. The white public graveyard is being maintained by the borough. This one had community taking care of it. So the newspapers tend to call out the condition, good and bad, throughout, even long after it is closed. Flooding. This is one of the lowest points in the borough. The sewer lines or stormwater lines still tend to converge in this general area. Flooding was a major problem. They would have to delay burials. Also, there are articles discussing that basically this area would be inundated with water over to the east and the area of the fairgrounds. In this case, they're talking about the fairgrounds that is the site of Maslin's and Lear and the modern day new hotel site. So there'd basically be a lake or a pond from here all the way over there. Flooding is a significant issue. And then we have overcrowding. So flooding and overcrowding are an issue not just in this cemetery, but also in the White Public Graveyard. The White Public Graveyard gets an addition to the south. This space does not. And we know that there are stacked burials here. This space is slightly smaller than a football field. And if you think of over a century of burials here, there are hundreds of people here. So there are stacked burials. And for several decades, the borough and the community are working together to find a place for a new burial ground. And this takes several decades to decide the best spot for this and get everyone on the same page. And in the summer of 1905, Union Cemetery, which is further north, is opened. And then there are several really bad rainstorms that in the late summer and in the fall of 1905, between the rainstorms and the overcrowding, we have a local board of health at this time, and they shut it down with a pretty graphic and upsetting article that talks about people being buried under just 18 inches of earth. So Lincoln Cemetery is officially closed. In 1907, they do report the remains of Minor Redmond, who's a Civil War veteran, are reinterred in Union, but that's the only record of anyone being reinterred that I have currently found. So what happens after it closed? We have a lot of things going on. Obviously, Union is becoming the place as the burial grounds. And you have people still trying to take care of this site. The churches are involved. There are trustees at various points. The condition comes up frequently. In 1936, the building to the west of me, which is now known as Hope Station, was put in as the passenger train station. And people were upset that people coming in and or out of Carlisle were seeing this site that had become run down. And in 1936, they're like, it would be good for this spot, making it into a park. And the plans and the articles about that make it sound very similar to what eventually happened here. There was also talk of putting in a school for the children of color on this site or a community center. So none of those things obviously happened. The school goes in a block to the south of us. The community center goes in further north. But these ideas kept coming up. It was the cemetery that everyone thought that they could put something else on. When they were talking about Union, they also discussed the general idea was there were only 100 people buried here. That is very wrong. And when they were talking about the creation of Union, there was the idea that they were going to reinter everyone out there, but that never happened. So in the late 60s, as things progressed, the community members around here decided to petition the borough government to take ownership of the site. And that is a process in and of itself because there was no owner. There are no deeds, nothing that, the borough can, purchase the land from because no one owns it. And I don't think anyone necessarily knew that when they petitioned the borough for ownership, what was going to happen. And so this is the 70s. There's a green space movement and an environmental movement. They're cleaning up the Letort Stream during this time. And there were funding for urban green spaces. And the state was funding these projects. The borough applied. The state funded the creation of the park here and the destruction of the cemetery. Although just remember that this is still hollowed ground. So there are images of the cemetery, tombstones being removed. No one knows what happened to those. So if anyone knows, please let us know because that's an important part of this story and we'd love to know. And I say all of the tombstones were removed. That is not true. Ms. Fleta Jordan fought back. And so there is one remaining tombstone here in the cemetery, and that is the Jordan tombstone. So many thanks to the perseverance and strength of Miss Fleta Jordan for her fight to keep the stone here. Within the past few years, as we got together, and we have the archway that the War College funded here. This beautiful mural with our amazing partners with Pennsylvania Humanities Council and the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts that funded the mural, Hope Station, the borough. These projects are all led by the descendants. Creatapalooza and the Carlisle Tool Library helped make this beautiful mural and the tiles come to life, so please stop by and see them. And if you look at the names painted in the mural, you'll recognize a lot of them. The descendants of these people are still in this community. And I think it's important when we think about the sacredness of these sites that, you know, these are people's loved ones, their children, their parents, their aunties and uncles, and to think about the lives. So they're important obviously within their family, but they're important to our community and help build this community. So come and reflect. If you have images of this space, even if it's in the background, we'd love to see them. If you have ideas for more permanent memorials in the site, if you're a descendant, we'd love to hear from you. This story is still unfolding. We have a new story currently be creating. The history of this site is evolving as I'm standing here, and I can't wait to see what happens. But please remember that this is hallowed ground with veterans and other loved ones buried here. So thank you for joining me today for a very short look at Lincoln Cemetery in Carlisle.